Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, all the way to ancient Rome. Imagine yourself strolling through the bustling forum, the scent of baking bread mingling with something distinctly less pleasant from the nearby drains. You're wearing a simple tunic, maybe a bit scratchy, and the air is thick with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clatter of sandals on cobblestones, and the distant roar from the Colosseum. It's a vibrant, chaotic, utterly alive city, and you, my friend, are right in the thick of it. But let's be honest, living in ancient Rome, for all its grandeur, probably wasn't a walk in the park. You probably won't survive this. A simple, stubbed toe could lead to something far more serious than a week of limping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far these whispers of history travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a world where the average life expectancy hovers somewhere in the late 20s or early 30s. Not exactly retirement age, is it? You wake up feeling a bit off. Perhaps your stomach is churning, or your head throbs with a dull ache you can't quite shake. In ancient Rome, daily life was a delicate balance, and sickness was a constant, unwelcome companion. Forget your modern day pharmacies and easily accessible general practitioners. Here, health was a far more precarious affair, often dictated by the whims of the gods, the quality of your local water supply, and frankly, a bit of luck. Common ailments were, shall we say, less than glamorous. You might suffer from a persistent cough, or perhaps a sudden fever that sends chills down your spine, even on a hot day. Digestive issues were practically a rite of passage, given the varied and often unsanitary food preparation methods. Then there were the injuries, a slipped disc from hauling too many amphorae, a nasty cut from a stray chariot wheel, or even something as seemingly minor as a toothache, which could quickly escalate into a life-threatening infection without modern antibiotics. You might also encounter skin conditions, eye infections, and a host of parasitic nasties that thrived in the communal bathhouses and bustling urban environment. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of lead in their pipes contributed significantly to widespread health problems beyond simple poisoning, affecting everything from mental acuity to reproductive health. The Romans had their own understanding of how the body worked, heavily influenced by Greek medical theories that would eventually seep into their culture. They often believed in the four humors: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, and that an imbalance of these humors was the root cause of most illnesses. Feeling sluggish, too much phlegm perhaps, running a fever, your blood might be a bit too enthusiastic. It's a bit like a medieval version of a car mechanic trying to fix an engine based purely on the sound it makes, without ever looking under the hood. Their solutions, as we'll soon see, often involved attempts to rebalance these invisible fluids through bleeding, purging, or inducing sweats. It sounds rather intense for a Sunday afternoon, doesn't it? The daily struggle for good health was palpable. You might find yourself relying on the wisdom of an elder, or perhaps a traveling charlatan promising miraculous cures. The air itself, or miasma as they sometimes called it, was often blamed for spreading disease, leading to a focus on fresh air and cleanliness, at least in theory. This is why you'd see grand public works like aqueducts bringing fresh water into the city and vast sewer systems attempting to whisk away the worst of the urban grime. Of course, the sheer volume of waste and the density of the population often overwhelmed even these impressive feats of engineering. So, while you might enjoy a leisurely soak in a public bath, remember that 100 other Romans, some with questionable hygiene, had probably been there just before you. It makes you appreciate your own private shower, doesn't it? As your stomach rumbles with a discomfort that no amount of stale bread seems to cure, you might consider remedies that are, by modern standards, rather homespun. Before the grand marble temples dedicated to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, or the emergence of learned physicians, Roman healing was very much a family affair. You'd find yourself at the mercy of the eldest woman in the household, the materfamilias, whose knowledge of herbal poultices and ancient incantations was passed down through generations, like a closely guarded family recipe. Think of it as a very intense, very hands on version of your grandma's chicken noodle soup for everything. But instead of chicken, it might involve boiled cabbage and a muttered prayer. The remedies were often rooted in common sense, observation, and a healthy dose of superstition. If you had a fever, you might be given cool cloths and encouraged to sweat it out. A broken bone might be splinted with sturdy branches and rags, the hope being that the bone would knit itself back together with time and rest. For digestive upsets, purgatives were common, substances designed to make you, well, evacuate whatever perceived evil was lurking within. This could be anything from harsh herbs to more bizarre concoctions. Imagine being told to drink a mixture of goat's milk and ash to cure your indigestion. Not exactly appealing, is it? Historians still argue whether some of these traditional remedies, like certain herbal infusions, actually had genuine medicinal properties, or if their perceived effectiveness was largely due to the placebo effect and the body's natural healing processes. Beyond the practical, there was always the spiritual. You might offer a small clay figurine of a healthy limb to a deity if you'd sprained your ankle, hoping for divine intervention. Charms and amulets were worn to ward off evil spirits thought to cause illness, or perhaps to simply offer a sense of comfort and control in a world where medical understanding was incredibly limited. It's a bit like carrying a lucky rabbit's foot, but with the added pressure of believing that if you lost it, you might suddenly come down with a terrible case of, well, anything. The Roman concept of health was also deeply intertwined with their daily routines and beliefs about purity. Bathing, for example, wasn't just about cleanliness, it was a ritual that contributed to overall well being. You'd spend hours at the public baths, moving from warm to hot to cold rooms, scraping off grime with a strigil, and socializing. This communal aspect of hygiene, while perhaps not always achieving true sterility, did promote a level of public cleanliness that was unusual for the ancient world. You might think of it as the original spa day. But instead of soothing music, you'd hear the endless chatter of hundreds of naked Romans. For more serious conditions, the concept of a dedicated medical professional was still a nascent one. Most communities relied on local wisdom, perhaps a skilled bone setter in the village, or even a traveling healer who might offer a mix of practical advice and theatrical spectacle. These were not regulated professions, so you took your chances. It was a bit like trusting your car repair to someone who swears they can fix it with a wrench and a strong belief in good luck. You never quite knew what you were going to get. The emphasis was on preventative measures, eating well, exercising, if your station allowed, and maintaining spiritual harmony. But when illness struck, the options were often grim, and the line between cure and curse was very, very thin. As your household remedies offer little more than mild distraction from your enduring malaise, you'd soon become aware of a subtle but significant shift occurring in Roman medical practices, the ever increasing influence of Greek medicine. For centuries, Rome had been a pragmatic, self sufficient society, a little suspicious of foreign imports, especially in something as fundamental as health. But as the Roman Republic expanded, so too did its exposure to the sophisticated, theoretical, and often highly effective medical traditions of the Hellenistic world. It's like discovering that your trusty old abacus can be replaced by a shiny new calculator. There's a learning curve, but the potential benefits are clear. Greek physicians, many of them slaves or freedmen, began arriving in Rome, bringing with them a very different approach to illness. Instead of simply relying on tradition and prayer, these Medici, as the Romans eventually called them, brought a system based on observation, logic, and a deep understanding of anatomy and physiology, or at least their understanding of it. They weren't just mixing herbs, they were theorizing about humors, diagnosing based on symptoms, and even performing complex surgeries, some of which would make you wince even today. Imagine the Roman citizen, used to grandma's chicken broth, suddenly presented with a doctor who wants to discuss your melancholy bile and prescribe a regimen of special exercises. It was a new world. One of the most profound Greek contributions was the Hippocratic Corpus, a collection of medical texts attributed to Hippocrates of Kos. This wasn't just a book of cures, it was a philosophical framework for medicine. It introduced concepts like clinical observation, watching the patient, noting changes, and making educated guesses about the prognosis. It emphasized ethics, famously giving us the Hippocratic Oath, though the version doctors swear today is a bit different from the original. You might hear a Greek doctor, with an air of intellectual superiority, explain the importance of diet, exercise, and climate in maintaining health, rather than just blaming angry gods. Historians still argue whether Hippocrates himself was a single historical figure or a compilation of many different medical thinkers whose ideas were later attributed to one legendary name. The Romans, ever practical, initially approached these Greek newcomers with a healthy dose of skepticism. After all, their own traditions had served them well enough. But as Greek physicians demonstrated their skills, particularly in treating injuries and certain diseases, the Romans slowly began to adopt these methods. It wasn't always a smooth transition. Some Roman traditionalists scoffed at the philosophical nature of Greek medicine, preferring a more direct, no nonsense approach. It's a bit like trying to convince someone who only uses a hammer that a screwdriver might occasionally be useful. Despite initial resistance, Greek medical schools and practices eventually became firmly embedded in Roman society. Wealthy Roman families would often employ a Greek physician as a household retainer, valuing their expertise and education. Public health initiatives, while often credited to Roman engineering, increasingly drew on Greek ideas about sanitation and the management of disease. So, while you might still be given a peculiar herbal concoction by your grandmother, the chances of encountering a Greek trained medicus with a more systematic approach to your churning stomach were growing by the day. And for better or worse, these foreign ideas were about to transform how Romans thought about their own bodies and their own health. With the whispers of Greek medical philosophy now echoing through the streets of Rome, a new figure gradually steps into the spotlight, the professional medicus, no longer just the wisdom of the mater familias or the occasional traveling bone setter. These were individuals who, for a fee, offered their services as healers. Imagine, if you will, the first time you encounter such a person. They might not have a grand office with a waiting room. Perhaps they set up a stall in the market or tend to the sick in the house of a wealthy patron. But they carry an air of learned authority, perhaps even a few scrolls detailing anatomical knowledge. It's like the first time you see a specialized mechanic for your chariot rather than just relying on your cousin who's good with tools. The roles of these medici were incredibly diverse, reflecting the broad and often unregulated nature of early medicine. Some were general practitioners, treating everything from fevers to broken bones. Others might have specialized, perhaps in eye ailments or even in treating specific types of wounds suffered by gladiators, a very niche, very high stakes form of sports medicine. You might find a medicus attached to a legion, patching up soldiers after skirmishes, or attending to the ailments that spread quickly through crowded camps. These military doctors were often at the forefront of surgical innovation, driven by necessity on the battlefield. Not all medici were created equal, however. The profession wasn't formally regulated in the way modern medicine is. There were no licensing boards or standardized medical schools for quite some time. This meant that while some medici were highly skilled and ethical, having trained under respected masters, others were essentially charlatans, preying on the hopes of the sick with outlandish cures and exaggerated claims. It was a bit of a medical Wild West, where patient outcomes could vary wildly depending on who you consulted. Historians still argue whether the lack of formal regulation was a hindrance to medical progress or if it fostered a more pragmatic, adaptive approach to healing that allowed diverse ideas to flourish. A skilled medicus would often gain a reputation attracting patients through word of mouth. They might live modestly, or if particularly successful, could become quite wealthy, owning slaves and substantial properties. For a wealthy Roman family, having a resident medicus was a status symbol, a sign of both foresight and affluence. You'd see them tending to various members of the household, from the patriarch to the youngest child, dispensing advice on diet, exercise, and of course, those peculiar remedies. These early doctors faced immense challenges. Without microscopes, they couldn't see bacteria or viruses. Without modern diagnostics, they relied heavily on observation and the patient's own description of symptoms. They couldn't perform blood tests or x rays. Their understanding of the body was limited by what they could see with the naked eye. Often during dissections of animals, human dissection was generally taboo for a long time. So, when a medicus peered at your swollen ankle or felt your feverish forehead, they were drawing on a lifetime of observation and a theoretical framework that, while advanced for its time, was still fundamentally incomplete. It makes you realize just how impressive even their limited successes truly were. They were working with, effectively, one hand tied behind their backs, and often still managing to provide some form of relief, even if it was just through comfort and reassurance. So, you finally managed to secure an appointment with a medicus, or perhaps they've been summoned to your modest Roman dwelling. Now comes the moment of truth. The diagnosis? Forget the sterile examination rooms and sophisticated machinery of modern medicine. In ancient Rome, diagnosing an ailment was a far more intimate, sensory, and often intuitive process. You lie on a simple couch, or perhaps just recline on cushions, and the medicus begins their assessment. It's like a detective trying to solve a mystery with only a few cryptic clues and a keen sense of observation. The first thing they'd likely do is observe you, your complexion, the pallor of your skin, the brightness or dullness of your eyes, the way you breathe. All these visual cues would be noted. They'd look for swelling, rashes, or any unusual marks. Then comes the touch. They might feel your forehead to gauge your fever, or gently press on your abdomen to check for tenderness or bloating. The temperature of your skin, the moisture of your brow, every detail contributes to their growing mental picture of your condition. It's a remarkably hands-on approach, requiring a finely tuned sense of touch. Next, they'd likely engage you in conversation, asking about your symptoms. You describe your aches, your pains, the churning in your stomach, or the throbbing in your head. The medicus would pay close attention to your voice, your answers, perhaps even your breathing as you speak. They might ask about your diet, your sleep patterns, your daily routine, all to understand the context of your illness. This holistic approach, considering the patient's lifestyle and environment, was a key tenet of Greek medicine, which the Romans adopted. It's like your doctor asking if you've been stressed lately, but without the benefit of knowing what stress really means in a biochemical sense. One of the most crucial diagnostic tools was urinalysis. Yes, you heard that right. The medicus would carefully examine your urine, the color, clarity, sediment, even the smell of it, all provided clues to your internal state. Dark urine might suggest liver issues, while cloudy urine could indicate an infection. It was a remarkably rudimentary, but surprisingly effective way to gain insight into the body's processes, especially for kidney and bladder complaints. They even sometimes tasted it for sweetness, an early, if unappetizing, way to detect diabetes. Try not to think about that part too much. They might also examine your pulse, feeling the rhythm and strength of your heartbeat, was another important diagnostic technique believed to reveal imbalances in the body's humors. A rapid, thready pulse might indicate fever, while a slow, weak one could suggest exhaustion. This wasn't just about counting beats per minute. It was about discerning subtle qualities that, to the trained medicus, spoke volumes. Historians still argue whether the detailed pulse diagnostics described in ancient texts were truly as accurate as claimed, or if much of their interpretation relied on subjective experience and educated guesswork. Despite their keen observation, Roman doctors lacked the tools for internal examination. There were no x rays, no MRIs, no endoscopes. Their understanding of internal organ function was largely based on observation of injuries, animal dissections, and philosophical theories. So, while they could identify external symptoms, the underlying cause was often a matter of speculation. Imagine trying to fix a complex machine just by looking at its exterior. It was a fascinating blend of sharp observation, theoretical frameworks, and a good deal of educated guesswork, all performed without the comforting hum of modern medical equipment. With your diagnosis, or at least a working theory of your ailment, established, the medicus turns to the crucial next step, prescribing a remedy. And this is where ancient Roman pharmacology gets particularly fascinating and, for modern sensibilities, a bit unsettling. Forget neatly packaged pills and precisely measured dosages. You're about to enter a world of ingredients that range from the mundane to the truly bizarre, often mixed with a confidence that belied their true efficacy. It's like a chef trying to concoct a gourmet meal with ingredients pulled from a very dusty, very questionable pantry. Herbs, of course, were the bedrock of most remedies. You might be prescribed a decoction of chamomile for anxiety, or perhaps a poultice of mallow for inflammation. Many of these had genuine medicinal properties, known through centuries of trial and error. Think of willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, a genuine pain reliever. But alongside these sensible ingredients, you'd encounter things that make you raise an eyebrow. Crocodile dung, for instance, was sometimes used in eye salves. Yes, you heard that right. Or perhaps a dose of earthworms boiled in oil for earaches. It makes you wonder if the cure was sometimes worse than the disease, or at least far more unpleasant to administer. Historians still argue whether the inclusion of truly strange ingredients was based on genuine empirical observation, magical thinking, or simply a lack of understanding about what truly worked. Then there were the more complex concoctions. Theriac, for example, was a famous antidote to poisons and a general panacea, a sort of cure-all. It could contain dozens, sometimes hundreds, of ingredients, including opium, viper's flesh, and a dizzying array of herbs and minerals, all painstakingly prepared and aged. Imagine trying to get all those ingredients in one go. It's the ancient equivalent of a multivitamin, but with significantly more exotic and potentially dangerous components. Beyond the ingredients themselves, the method of administration was varied. You might be given a potion to drink, often bitter and unpleasant, designed to purge the body of ill humors. There were poultices and plasters to be applied externally, soothing inflamed skin or drawing out infection. Enemas were also common, used to cleanse the bowels and restore balance, and for skin conditions, salves and ointments, often olive oil based, were rubbed onto the affected areas. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? It seems some things just never quite caught on. The effectiveness of these remedies was, naturally, highly variable. For some conditions, they offered genuine relief or supported the body's natural healing. For others, they were utterly useless and occasionally actively harmful. The sheer lack of understanding of germ theory meant that even well intentioned remedies could introduce further infection. Dosage was often imprecise, relying on tradition and the medicus's experience rather than scientific measurement. You might be told to take a pinch or a handful, which for potent substances could be rather risky. The placebo effect, of course, played a huge role. If you truly believed a remedy would work, your body might respond in kind, especially for conditions with psychological components. The confidence of the medicus, the ritual of preparing the medicine, and the sheer hope of the patient all contributed to the perceived success of these often peculiar interventions. It's a bit like believing your lucky socks will help you win the lottery. Sometimes just the belief can be enough. Even if your peculiar concoctions offered some relief, there were times when Roman medicine had to move beyond potions and poultices. This brings us to the realm of surgical practices, an area where the limits of ancient knowledge truly became apparent, yet where remarkable, if often brutal, advancements were made out of sheer necessity. Imagine, if you will, the sheer terror of needing a surgical procedure in an era before anesthesia as we know it, or indeed before the understanding of germs. It's like undergoing a major car repair with only a hammer and a prayer. The primary drivers of surgical innovation in Rome weren't complex internal diseases, but rather external trauma. Battlefield medicine played a crucial role. Roman legions, constantly engaged in warfare, required skilled medici who could extract arrows, set broken bones, amputate mangled limbs, and dress horrific wounds. These military doctors often had more practical experience than their civilian counterparts, learning through the grim realities of conflict. You can envision a hurried tent hospital, the air thick with groans and the metallic tang of blood, as a legionary medicus works swiftly to save a soldier's life. Their surgical tools, while primitive by today's standards, were surprisingly varied and sophisticated for their time. You might see bronze or iron scalpels for incisions, forceps for gripping tissue or removing foreign objects, bone drills for trepanning, drilling holes in the skull, often to relieve pressure or perceived evil spirits, and cauterization irons used to stop bleeding by burning the tissue. The sound of sizzling flesh would have been a common accompaniment to many procedures. It's a stark reminder of the pain tolerance required of both patient and surgeon. One of the most common and often life-saving procedures was amputation. If a limb was crushed beyond repair, or if gangrene set in, amputation was often the only option to prevent the infection from spreading and killing the patient. This was done quickly, often with a saw, and then the stump would be cauterized or bandaged. The survival rate was low, but without it, the patient's fate was sealed. Historians still argue whether the pain and trauma of ancient amputation sometimes contributed more to a patient's demise than the initial injury itself, given the lack of sterile conditions. Another notable procedure was cataract removal, using a technique called couching. The medicus would push the clouded lens of the eye to the bottom of the eyeball, restoring some vision, though often imperfectly. It was a delicate procedure, requiring steady hands and immense precision, all without the aid of magnification. Imagine trying to thread a needle in the dark, but with someone's eyesight at stake. Of course, the biggest challenge was infection. Without germ theory, Roman surgeons had no concept of sterilization. Tools were reused, hands were unwashed, and dressings were often made from unsterile materials. This meant that even a successful surgery could be followed by a fatal infection, often manifesting as fever and pus. The patient might survive the knife, only to succumb days later to invisible killers. This is why even simple surgical interventions carried enormous risk. It makes you truly appreciate the antiseptic conditions of a modern operating theater, doesn't it? Beyond the personal struggles with illness and the specific interventions of the medicus, ancient Rome was a city, and indeed an empire, that grappled with health on a far grander scale. Public health and sanitation. While individual medical care was often rudimentary, the Romans were masters of engineering, and they applied this genius to managing the collective well-being of their vast populations. It's like designing a superhighway for health, even if the individual cars on it are a bit rickety. The most iconic testament to Roman public health efforts is, without a doubt, their aqueducts. Imagine miles upon miles of magnificent stone arches bringing fresh, clean water from distant springs and mountains directly into the heart of the city. This wasn't just for drinking, it supplied public fountains, private homes, for the wealthy, of course, and, crucially, the public baths. This constant supply of flowing water was revolutionary. You could simply walk to a public fountain and fill your jug, rather than relying on a dubious local well. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of water flowing through the city sometimes led to complacency about waste disposal, as people relied on the flow to carry away refuse. And where did all that water go after it had been used? Into the sewer systems. The most famous of these is the Cloaca Maxima, the greatest sewer, an ancient engineering marvel that drained the Roman Forum and carried waste into the Tiber River. While not as efficient as modern closed sewer systems, these networks helped to remove much of the urban filth and reduce the stench that would have otherwise plagued the city. You can imagine the relief of walking through the city without quite so much refuse underfoot, though the smell, even with the sewers, was likely still a rich tapestry of aromas. The public baths, as we touched on earlier, were another cornerstone of Roman public health. These grand complexes weren't just places to get clean, they were social hubs, gymnasiums, and even libraries. The ritual of moving through the frigidarium, cold room, tepidarium, warm room, and caldarium, hot room, was believed to cleanse both body and spirit, while the communal nature meant sharing water and spaces, which could inadvertently spread some diseases. The overall emphasis on washing and scraping away grime with a strigil promoted a level of personal hygiene far exceeding many other ancient cultures. It's a bit like a combined health club and community center, all rolled into one, and often entry was very cheap or even free. Beyond these grand engineering feats, Roman authorities also had measures for waste disposal, although these were often imperfect. Street cleaning efforts, while perhaps not up to modern standards, existed, and regulations tried to manage the disposal of human and animal waste. Markets were often inspected for the quality of food, and efforts were made to ensure a steady supply of grain to prevent widespread famine, which was a major cause of disease and mortality. So, while you might still encounter a few unsavory sights and smells, the overarching Roman commitment to public works meant that, in some respects, their urban centers were healthier places to live than many that came centuries later. It makes you realize how much impact a good infrastructure can have on everyday well being, even without microscopic understanding of disease. As the Roman sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forum, your thoughts might turn from the day's ailments to the impending darkness and the need for sleep. But what did sleep mean to an ancient Roman? It wasn't just a physical necessity, it was interwoven with philosophy, superstition, and the rhythms of daily life. You're entering a world where dreams were messages from the gods, and the night was a different realm entirely. It's like entering a silent, dark room where every creak and rustle holds potential meaning. For the average Roman, sleep patterns were often quite different from our own single, long stretch of slumber. Many practiced what's known as biphasic sleep, meaning they would sleep for a few hours after dusk, wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night, perhaps to socialize, visit the latrine, or even conduct business, and then return to bed for a second sleep until dawn. Imagine waking up at 1 a.m., feeling refreshed, and deciding to write a few letters or catch up on some reading before drifting off again. This might sound strange to you, but it was a perfectly natural rhythm, largely dictated by the lack of artificial light and the demands of an agrarian society. Historians still argue whether biphasic sleep was a universal practice across all social classes or more common among specific groups, such as the working class who might rise early for manual labor. Dreams held particular significance. The Romans, much like the Greeks, believed that dreams could be omens, prophecies, or even direct communications from deities. You might, upon waking from a particularly vivid dream, consult a dream interpreter to understand its hidden meaning, especially if it involved gods, strange animals, or future events. These interpreters, sometimes associated with temples, acted as spiritual guides, helping you navigate the complex messages from the unconscious. It's a bit like trying to decipher a cryptic text message from a very powerful, very ancient entity. The Romans also had various deities associated with sleep and dreams. Somnus, the god of sleep, and his son Morpheus, the god of dreams who could take human form in dreams, were key figures in their mythology. You might offer a small prayer to Somnus before bed, hoping for a peaceful night, or to Morpheus if you wished for clear, meaningful dreams. These deities were not just abstract concepts, they were believed to actively influence your nightly rest. The physical act of sleeping varied by social class. If you were wealthy, You'd likely have a comfortable bed with a wooden frame, ropes for support, and mattresses stuffed with wool, feathers, or straw. You might have a private bedroom offering a quiet sanctuary from the bustling household. But if you were poor, your bed might be a simple mat on the floor, or you might share a crowded room in an insula apartment building with the sounds of the city constantly filtering through thin walls. Imagine trying to get a good night's rest with your neighbors' conversations, cooking smells, and general nocturnal activities just inches away. This meant sleep could be a luxury, not a given. Despite the Romans' varied approaches to sleep, some nights slumber simply wouldn't come. You might find yourself staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the city amplified in the quiet darkness, your mind racing. This, dear listener, is the ancient Roman equivalent of staring at your phone at 3 a.m. Insomnia or sleeplessness was a very real and often distressing complaint in the ancient world, just as it is today. But without counting sheep, what did the Romans do to coax sleep to them? One common approach, stemming from their humoral theory, was to try and restore balance to the body. If you were deemed hot and dry and thus restless, a medicus might prescribe cooling foods like lettuce or cucumber, or even a cold bath before bed. Conversely, if you were cold and wet and still unable to sleep, perhaps a warming herbal tea would be recommended. It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet by adjusting the heating. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't quite hit the mark. Herbal remedies were naturally a go-to. Poppy juice, containing opium, was a powerful sedative and pain reliever, well known to the Romans. While effective, it also carried risks of addiction and overdose. Less potent, but still widely used, were herbs like chamomile, valerian, and hemlock, though hemlock, in larger doses, was a potent poison famously used in the execution of Socrates, a stark reminder of the fine line between medicine and danger. These were often prepared as infusions or decoctions, designed to soothe the nerves and induce drowsiness. Imagine sipping a bitter brew, hoping its earthy taste would be your ticket to dreamland. Beyond direct ingested remedies, physical relaxation was often encouraged. Gentle massages with scented oils were believed to calm the body and mind, easing tension that might prevent sleep. Some wealthy Romans even had specific slaves trained in massage for this purpose. You might also be advised to take a quiet stroll or even to engage in light exercise earlier in the day, mirroring modern advice about healthy sleep hygiene. However, the concept of a strict sleep schedule was less rigid, given their often biphasic sleeping patterns. For persistent cases, the medicus might delve into your emotional state. Was there anxiety, grief, unresolved conflict? The Stoic and Epicurean philosophies, popular in Rome, emphasized mental tranquility. You might be advised to meditate on calming thoughts or to engage in introspective exercises to clear your mind. It's a very early form of cognitive behavioral therapy without the fancy name or the scientific studies to back it up. Historians still argue whether the philosophical approach to mental well-being had a significant, measurable impact on physical ailments like insomnia, or if it was primarily a coping mechanism. Finally, superstition and ritual often played a part. You might offer a small token to the gods of sleep or perform a simple ritual to ward off bad dreams or restless spirits. Amulets were sometimes worn to ensure peaceful slumber. These practices offered psychological comfort, a sense of control in a world where medical understanding was limited. So, whether it was a strong herbal brew, a soothing massage, or a heartfelt prayer to Somnus, the ancient Roman insomniac employed a range of methods, some surprisingly familiar, others wonderfully peculiar, to try and win the nightly battle for rest. Given the wide array of ailments and the increasingly sophisticated, for the time, medical theories, you might wonder, did ancient Rome have anything akin to specialized sleep doctors? The short answer is not in the way we understand them today. You wouldn't find a sign hanging outside a Roman villa saying Dr. Somnus, Sleep Disorders Clinic. However, the concept of specialization did exist, even if it wasn't as rigidly defined or institutionalized as in modern medicine. Think of it more as a medicus gaining a particular reputation or developing an expertise in certain areas. A doctor might become known for their skill in treating eye diseases, or perhaps for their knowledge of women's health. Similarly, a medicus, who was particularly adept at soothing anxious minds, prescribing effective sedatives like those poppy based remedies, or simply having a calming bedside manner, might have found themselves frequently consulted by those suffering from insomnia or other sleep disturbances. It was more about practical experience and observed success than a formal medical degree in somnology. The emphasis on holistic care also meant that a general medicus would consider sleep as an integral part of overall health. If you came to them with digestive issues, they wouldn't just give you a purge, they'd likely ask about your sleep patterns, your stress levels, and your daily routine. Because the Roman understanding of the body was so intertwined with the balance of humors and the flow of vital forces, a disturbed sleep was often seen as a symptom of a larger imbalance rather than an isolated problem. So, while no medicus specialized only in sleep, any good one would have paid close attention to it. Historians still argue whether the perceived holistic approach of Roman medicine was genuinely beneficial or simply a necessity due to limited diagnostic capabilities, forcing doctors to consider every aspect of a patient's life. Sometimes, sleep problems might be addressed by non medical practitioners. A philosopher might offer advice on mental tranquility and lifestyle changes to improve sleep. A priest or temple attendant might provide rituals or prayers to deities like Somnus for peaceful slumber. Even a skilled massage therapist or iatroliptes, whose primary role was often to oil and rub athletes, might also be consulted for their ability to relax the body and induce sleep through physical manipulation. It's a bit like getting advice on sleep from your yoga instructor, your therapist, and your doctor all at once without clear distinctions between their roles. So, while the concept of a dedicated sleep doctor as a formal specialty didn't exist, the treatment of sleep related issues was certainly a part of Roman medical practice. It was simply integrated into the broader care provided by general practitioners or even by individuals from other professions who offered comfort and practical solutions. You wouldn't find a specific clinic, but you might find a specific medicus who had a knack for helping you drift off, perhaps with a calming herbal tea and a reassuring presence. When you, an ancient Roman, sought the help of a medicus, the interaction was a fascinating blend of expectation, authority, and often a healthy dose of skepticism. The patient doctor relationship in Rome was far less formal than today, more akin to a personal bond built on reputation and trust. It's like hiring a skilled artisan for a custom job. You'd rely on their expertise, but you'd also want to know they understood your needs. First, you, as the patient, would likely be more active in your own care. Roman society emphasized self reliance and personal responsibility for health, often through diet, exercise, and good hygiene. Only when these failed would you consult a medicus. When you did, you'd be expected to describe your symptoms clearly, although the language of illness might have been very different from modern medical terminology. You might complain of chills and heat or a black humor weighing on the spirit. The medicus would listen, observe, and ask questions. But there was less of the passive patient role we sometimes see today. The medicus, in turn, had to gain your trust. Without formal credentials or a regulatory body, their reputation was paramount. Success stories, word of mouth recommendations, and a confident demeanor were crucial. A good medicus would exude an air of wisdom and experience, perhaps even a touch of gravitas. They might arrive with their bag of instruments and a few scrolls, ready to impress upon you their knowledge. Imagine a Roman doctor trying to convince you to drink a concoction of boiled snails. They'd better have a very convincing bedside manner. Economic status heavily influenced the relationship. If you were wealthy, you might have a household medicus, a slave or freedman living within your villa, providing continuous care for your entire family. This created a close, long-term relationship where the doctor knew your medical history and family predispositions intimately. For the poorer Roman, however, access was more sporadic. You might visit a public clinic, often just a doctor's room in a busy street, or rely on a traveling medicus or temple healer. These interactions would be brief, transactional, and perhaps less personalized. Historians still argue whether the Medici often exploited the poor or genuinely tried to provide care regardless of social standing. Communication was key. The medicus would explain their diagnosis and proposed remedies, often framing it within the humoral theory or other prevailing medical philosophies. You, as the patient, might ask questions, express doubts, or even try to negotiate the treatment. It wasn't always a one sided dictate. Some doctors were renowned for their eloquence and ability to explain complex ideas simply, while others were more direct and authoritative. Ultimately, the effectiveness of the relationship often depended on mutual respect. You trusted the medicus's knowledge and experience, and they, in turn, respected your symptoms and concerns. While the scientific basis of their treatments was limited, the human element of reassurance, empathy, and shared belief in a potential cure played a significant role in the healing process. It shows that even without all our modern advancements, the fundamental human need for care and understanding from a healer remains constant. Despite the growing influence of Greek rationalism and the emergence of professional medici, the average Roman's worldview was still deeply steeped in superstition and magic. When it came to health, the line between medical intervention and divine intercession was often blurred, if it existed at all. You might consult a learned medicus for your fever, but you'd likely still offer a prayer to the gods just in case. It's like bringing your broken car to a mechanic, but then also rubbing a lucky charm on the engine before you start it up. For the Romans, illness was not solely a physical phenomenon. It could be a punishment from an angry god, a malevolent spirit, or even the result of an evil eye cast upon you by a jealous neighbor. This meant that remedies often included ritualistic elements. You might wear an amulet, a small charm, perhaps depicting a phallus for protection, or a symbol of a deity, to ward off disease. These weren't just decorative, they were believed to possess genuine protective power, deflecting ill fortune and illness. Imagine wearing a tiny little protective charm around your neck, hoping it would deflect bad vibes as effectively as a shield. Religious practices played a significant role. If you were truly ill, you might make a pilgrimage to a healing temple, such as one dedicated to Aesculapius, the Roman equivalent of the Greek Asclepius, the god of medicine. Here, you would undergo a ritual called incubation, sleeping within the temple precincts in the hope that the god would appear to you in a dream and reveal the cure or even heal you directly. You might offer a votive tablet, a small model of the afflicted body part, a clay foot for a sore foot, an eye for eye trouble, as a thanksgiving offering for a cure. Historians still argue whether the apparent cures at these temples were due to genuine divine intervention, the power of belief, placebo effect, or simply the natural course of recovery coupled with the rest and healthy environment of the temple. Beyond the official state cults, there was a thriving world of folk magic and charms. You might seek out a local wise woman or a traveling sorcerer for a curse tablet, a defixio, to be inscribed with a prayer to a chthonic deity to harm your enemies, or perhaps to bring about healing for yourself. These were often lead or bronze tablets rolled up and deposited in wells, graves, or temples. Or perhaps you'd perform a small household ritual, burning incense and reciting ancient words to cleanse your home of sickness. It's a fascinating blend of official religion and grassroots magical practice, all aimed at influencing the precarious balance of health. Even some Medici incorporated these elements into their practice, sometimes using incantations or astrological readings alongside their herbal remedies. They understood that belief played a powerful role in healing, and that for many Romans, the spiritual dimension of illness was just as real as the physical. So, while you might receive a practical medical treatment for your ailment, you'd also likely engage in some form of spiritual or magical practice, ensuring all bases were covered in your quest for well being. After all, when facing an uncertain world, why leave anything to chance? Despite the impressive aqueducts, the widespread use of public baths, and the evolving role of the medicus, Roman medicine, like the empire itself, eventually faced a period of decline and transformation. You might imagine slow fading of the old ways, replaced by new challenges and changing societal structures. It's like a grand old house, gradually showing the signs of age, with cracks appearing in the foundations and the once gleaming paint beginning to peel. Several factors contributed to this shift. The vastness of the Roman Empire, while initially a source of strength, eventually became a burden. As the empire grew, maintaining consistent public health standards across disparate regions, many with different climates and local challenges, became increasingly difficult. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed even the most brilliant Roman engineers. Imagine trying to keep every single public bath in every corner of a continent spanning empire spotless and well maintained. It was a monumental task. Economic instability also played a significant role. As the empire's economy faltered, the resources available for grand public works, like repairing aqueducts or maintaining sewer systems, dwindled. Cities that once boasted clean water and efficient sanitation might find themselves struggling with decaying infrastructure. This meant that the very foundations of Roman public health began to crumble. You might notice the public fountains running less frequently, or the smell in the poorer districts becoming more pronounced, a stark reminder of diminishing resources. Furthermore, the rise of Christianity brought with it a shift in philosophical outlooks regarding the body and illness, while pagan Roman beliefs often intertwined health with civic duty and physical vigor. Early Christian thought sometimes emphasized the spiritual over the physical, viewing illness as a trial to be endured or a path to spiritual purification. This isn't to say Christians didn't seek healing, but the emphasis shifted from the purely physical or civic realm to a more spiritual one. This philosophical change, while not a direct cause of medical decline, certainly influenced how people perceived and approached illness. Historians still argue whether the decline of urban centers and public works was a cause or a consequence of the broader decline of the Western Roman Empire. The fragmentation of knowledge also contributed. As the empire fragmented, so too did the centralized institutions that might have fostered medical education and research. While individual doctors still practiced, the grand schools and libraries that had once nurtured advanced medical thought became less prevalent. This meant that knowledge, instead of being continually built upon and disseminated, sometimes became localized or even lost. It's like fragments of a great book being scattered to the winds, making it harder to piece together the full story. Finally, the impact of various plagues and epidemics cannot be overstated. Diseases like the Antonine Plague or the Plague of Justinian ravaged the Roman population, often overwhelming whatever medical knowledge and infrastructure existed. These devastating outbreaks, for which there were no effective cures, certainly hastened the decline of public health and further eroded faith in medical capabilities. So, while Roman medicine had its moments of brilliance, the forces of history, economics, and unforeseen scourges ultimately brought about significant changes in its practice and scope. Despite the eventual decline and transformation of Roman medical practices, their contributions, insights, and even their misunderstandings left an indelible mark on the course of Western medicine. You're now stepping back from the ancient world, looking at the long shadow cast by their health efforts, a shadow that stretched for centuries. It's like tracing the faint lines of a map drawn long ago, some details perfectly clear, others a bit smudged with time. One of the most enduring legacies is the emphasis on public health and sanitation. The Roman engineering marvels, aqueducts and sewers, became a blueprint for future civilizations, even if the knowledge of how to build and maintain such systems was temporarily lost during the Dark Ages. The very idea that a city's health depended on clean water and waste removal, rather than just individual cures, was a profound concept that resurfaced powerfully in the 19th century. You can see the echoes of the Cloaca Maxima in modern sewer systems, and the principle of bringing fresh water to urban populations continues to be a cornerstone of public health infrastructure worldwide. Then there's the lasting impact of Greek medical theory, which the Romans so eagerly adopted. The ideas of Hippocrates and later Galen, a Greek physician who practiced extensively in Rome, formed the bedrock of Western medical thought for over 1,000 years. The concept of the four humors, while ultimately incorrect, dominated medical understanding right up until the scientific revolution. So, when a medieval barber surgeon bled a patient, they were, in a way, still operating under a system popularized by the Romans. It's a bit like still using an ancient operating system on your computer, even if you know there are newer versions available. The development of medical terminology is another clear legacy. Many Latin words used by Roman Medici are still the basis for medical terms today. From medicus itself to anatomical terms and disease names, the language of Roman healing permeates modern medicine. You might hear a doctor today use a term whose roots stretch back to a Roman physician describing an ailment, a subtle but persistent echo across millennia. However, the legacy also includes some important misunderstandings. The Roman reliance on Galen's anatomical theories, which were largely based on animal dissections due to taboos against human dissection, led to inaccuracies that persisted for centuries. Imagine trying to understand the human body by only studying a pig. You'd get some things right, but many crucial details would be off. These errors had to be painstakingly corrected by later anatomists during the Renaissance. Historians still argue whether the reverence for ancient authority figures like Galen hindered or helped early medical progress by providing a stable, albeit flawed, framework. Finally, the very concept of a professional medical practitioner evolved from the Roman medicus. While not standardized, the idea of someone dedicated to the art and science of healing, offering their services for a fee, set a precedent. The relationship between patient and doctor, the search for effective remedies, and the desire to alleviate suffering. These are universal human experiences that the Romans navigated with their own unique blend of practicality, superstition, and burgeoning scientific inquiry. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can appreciate the long, winding path that medicine has traveled, a journey that owes no small debt to the curious case of the Roman sleep doctors and all their colleagues who tried to bring health to an ancient world. Now, as the stories of Roman health and healing gently fade into the quiet of the night, allow your own body to relax. The echoes of bustling forums and ancient aqueducts are now just soft murmurs in your mind. Let the thoughts of strange remedies and ancient practices dissolve, replaced by a sense of calm and stillness. Your own bed is far more comfortable, your own health far more understood than anything our Roman friends could have imagined. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress, the soft rhythm of your breath, a gentle companion. There's nothing more to do, nowhere else to be, just the quiet hum of the present moment, inviting you deeper into rest. Let your eyelids grow heavy, your muscles loosen, and your mind grow still. The history is told. The journey is complete, just peace and quiet and the gentle slide into slumber.